Enthusiasm. All right. Did you? This is a slightly controversial subject, so if you walk away from this thinking that there's something that you should encourage someone to do, or that if you have this problem you should do yourself, please understand that that is not the purpose of this presentation. Okay, so this presentation is not designed to give anybody any therapeutic advice. This is cutting edge stuff, so it's not been, run through FDA trials, and you shouldn't go ahead and. Does everybody understand what I'm saying? Okay. What? Because you suck at this.
I counted three new people this morning.
Okay. Oh, you did.
So in the 1960s, there was a Barbie released, and it came with a scale set permanently at 110, and a book titled How to Lose Weight, with the instructions inside being don't eat. Okay, so the article I chose is called Cholecystokinin Revisited, CCK and the Hunger Trap in Anorexia Nervosa, or in simpler terms, anorexia, I can't just get over it. So what is anorexia nervosa? It is an eating disorder, one of many types that is generally, the symptoms are like self-starvation and excessive weight loss, which can come from a variety of different means, whether it's just not eating enough, not necessarily not eating at all, but not eating enough, whether it's binging and purging, so like eating a lot of food and then vomiting it back up, or over-exercise, which would all lead to excessive weight loss. It's a serious psychiatric disorder that typically affects early to mid-adolescent girls. And
Chelsea, can you close the door?
so imagine your body needs food to eat, so what do you think would happen if you didn't eat? General question.
You would die. You would die. You have no idea
Yeah.
what you're doing.
Like, without food, this leads to dehydration, which would lead to like kidney failure, low bone density, and your heart would start beating slower, and you would have lower blood pressure because your body doesn't have the energy to keep your heart pumping, and then your heart could give out, and then end up in death. So there, as I said before, there are many different like subtypes of anorexia nervosa. It's classified as one like disorder, but there are different types of symptoms. Restricting refers to when you just limit intake of food or over-exercise. Bulimic refers to the binging, purging, where you eat a lot of food and then vomit it back up to end up losing weight. So in order to treat things, one of the best things to do is go back to the roots of it and figure out what might cause anorexia nervosa. So, does anybody have any ideas as to
what?
As to what might cause anorexia?
Anything back there?
I got an idea, but I would bet everybody else does too. How about low self-esteem?
That has been considered a factor with like the Barbie from before, like people are pressured to look the way is kind of an idea as to what might cause anorexia.
17 magazine.
I think that's a common misconception, though.
I
Precisely.
don't know about that.
I think it is a common misconception. I think it's more about a loss of control.
I think that in combination with, so I think that there's definitely a pressure generated by media. Well, I mean, a reflection of society itself, but propagated through media. I don't know, I had to read, when I was coming out of the honors projects last year, I read like a crap load of teeny bopper magazines, and I was just horrified.
Yeah, but if you go back and look at the research, a lot of it says like they'll have anecdotal evidence from, not even anecdotal evidence, but they'll have interviews with young girls who've had this, and most of them say it's really not about the media when it comes, maybe the media in the beginning, but when it comes down to it, it's a loss of control.
I think though a lot of people like for anorexia, it's like they're not in control of other things in their life. I don't know, so they feel that this is something that they can control, like their weight.
But yeah, so those are all like factors that play into the onset of anorexia nervosa. But a lot of the things that there's kind of the preconceived notion that it's only outside influences and that it's not really like self-inflicted, but that it's kind of like self-brought on, and that if someone just, oh, hey, you know what, just go eat a cheeseburger and then they'll be cured. But that's really not the case. They have found evidence that anorexia nervosa there's actually like a biological component, because the symptoms of anorexia nervosa can be induced in mice. What they would do is they would provide mice with a way, it's called an activity-based anorexia model. So they provide mice with like a running wheel and then limit their food intake. And after a while, these mice start showing signs of anxiety and hyperactivity. So despite their low food intake, they start running on their wheel a lot, which seems counterintuitive. And I don't really know how mice feel about control and perfectionism, or like the drive to be, like the media's influence to be thin. But these mice can be induced to show symptoms of anorexia nervosa. So it's more than just the outside influences.
Actually, I've seen this. It's a little weird. Like the mice, they can't stay still at all. And if there's anything, like if there's not a wheel in the cage, they'll just start like running into the walls and jumping. And if there's a wheel, they'll run till they die.
And it's similar to overexercise in human cases of anorexia nervosa, where people will just keep exercising without eating enough to compensate. There's also signs that the genetics do play a role in anorexia nervosa in the way it sets on. Like in different mouse strains, some mice, like this brown mice, would run more, would have greater hyperactivity, and the white mouse would have less hyperactivity. And it's been shown to be sort of hereditary. They found there have been studies between like identical twins and families with eating disorders, although that's not very established, whether it's like nurture or nature as to that. And then also the epigenetic influence of all the outside influences affects the biology, which can lead to the onset of anorexia nervosa, especially if you're already predisposed to it. So my article focuses on CCK and its possible role in anorexia nervosa. CCK is a group of peptides that CCK refers to collectively a group of peptides that's cleaved off from this thing called preprocholecystokinin, not important. So basically it's cleaved off at different lengths. So this would be CCK 58, 39, 33. The numbers don't really matter. They all serve about the same function, well, for what's important. There are two receptors, CCK A and B. CCK is found in the intestines and in the central nervous system. And for this study, they focused on the CCK A receptor. which deals with digestion and the sensation of feeling fuller. In previous research, CCK has been linked to eating disorder research because it's been shown to make you feel fuller, and both animals and humans, and therefore like kind of make you if you feel fuller, then you wouldn't want to eat as much. And so yeah, it's clear, kind of. So if I injected CCK into you, how would you feel? Yeah, okay, that's important. Okay. This is not one for me.
That's it, mostly.
Hmm?
I'll come in here.
It's a computer. Computer looking out.
That's okay, just go ahead.
Okay. So, let's just say for now, okay. If you were to look at an anorexia nervosa patient, what would you speculate as to the CCK levels?
Hi.
And that's partially true.
You can sketch on the board if you need to. Or I can sketch for you. I think I remember the graphs.
Okay. So, in the study, the anorexia nervosa patients were given a standard 250 calorie meal for breakfast, and then the levels of CCK were measured in the patients, and they were measured at 3 different times. One was at the very beginning of their admission; they had not gained any weight. These were patients in treatment center. Sorry. Oh, there we go. Okay.
Is this right one?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Just this is your job. Okay. Sorry. Okay.
What did I do?
Sorry. Okay. So, the CCK of these patients was measured at 3 different times in their recovery. T0 refers to when they just entered the treatment center, they hadn't gained any weight. T1 is after an initial weight gain of about 5 pounds. And then T2 refers to they've gained even more weight and they're when they're about to be released from this treatment center at least. They also, at each of the 3 times, filled out a questionnaire for gastrointestinal complaints because not eating tends to screw up your gastrointestinal symptoms. Okay. And they measure this in 2 ways, which is just GIS, which refers to the frequency of the symptoms, and GIM is the severity. Not super important, just good to know.
Good.
Okay, good. Okay. So this was the graph of the data that they found in the CCK levels in the patients. So the darkest bar is just a control here. And this is T0 at the very beginning of their treatment, T1 after initial weight gain, and then T2 after even more weight gain. So you see here that the controls and the anorexia patients at the very beginning have very similar CCK levels, showing, but as soon as they gain some weight, their CCK levels jump a lot. And then after more weight gain, it goes somewhat back down. So what does this show you? It shows that anorexia patients, the body kind of adapts to not eating, and it releases the same amount of CCK as a normal person would, stimulated by the same size meal. But then after gaining weight, for some reason, the CCK levels spike, and the patients would feel fuller than before. So by saying that the CCK levels were high, you were kind of right, but not really, which was surprising to everyone. So yeah.
Tiffany, would you go back to the previous slide and just kind of reiterate and explain again the significance of the changes from T2 to T3?
From this one, this is,
Yeah.
there's no T3.
Oh, I'm sorry, from the very
T1 to
top
T2.
one to the
Oh, okay,
second one.
sorry, okay, so then from T1 to T2, it goes somewhat back down. So it shows that after gaining more weight, the body seems to start to restore the CCK levels back to normal, closer to normal at least than this. So this was measuring the difference between the subtypes of anorexia nervosa, which is restricting versus bulimic. And the general trend is that the darker color on the left is the restricting and the lighter color is the bulimic. So there's the general trend is that it's higher. CCK levels are higher in restricting patients rather than bulimic patients. The data didn't quite reach significance because there were only 23 patients in the study. But this would show, this could possibly be a reason, or either a reason or a result, I don't know, of why the bulimic patients would be kind of more inclined to binge and then purge rather than just restrict overall. So even among like anorexia nervosa, there's different symptoms and different biological responses. Questions? And then in respect to the questionnaire that they filled out about their gastrointestinal symptoms, the general trend of the data was that initially the CCK levels here, the higher they are, the less improvement in the gastrointestinal symptoms they would feel. It was they filled out a questionnaire scored from like 0 to 100, depending, like the more severe your symptoms were, the higher score you would get, and these numbers referred to how much it changed over recovery. These are the CCK levels at T0 when they had just entered the treatment center. But by the time they were to be released from the treatment center, their CCK levels weren't correlated to their gastrointestinal symptom improvement. Okay. So what that implies is that when the patients are suffering from anorexia, suffering more severely, the CCK has something to do with the gastrointestinal symptoms, but once the body's functioning normally again, it doesn't seem to play a role. Okay. So I guess the question now is, what does it all mean? So basically, anorexia patients fall into this thing that the authors referred to in the title, called like the hunger trap. So basically, what the general trend is that when anorexia patients are in recovery, what they find is that the initial weight gain is the hardest to achieve. The patients can kind of increase their weight, and then they hit a plateau, and it's it's more difficult to push them to gain weight. But then after that initial, or not initial, very initial, that second kind of period of the most resistance to weight gain, everything else becomes significantly easier to move forward from there. So, and that's what was implied by the data. At T1, with the initial weight gain, the patients would feel fuller and therefore be less inclined to eat and gain weight. And so basically the bodies of the patients are basically acting out against them to keep them suffering from the disorder, so obviously telling someone to eat.
Keep them suffering. Can you explain that?
Because after the initial weight gain, the body there's a higher level of CCK. So the body is basically telling the patient, oh, I'm full, don't eat anymore. So instead of wanting to eat, wanting to gain weight, which is already difficult for the patients, the patients literally feel like they are fuller and they shouldn't be eating. Yeah.
This is sort of on a tangent, but do you know if there have been any studies looking at whether there is a significant CCK increase if you go from a stable weight to an obese weight? What I'm suggesting by that is, would it be that when you put on a significant weight gain, does your body immediately release increased levels of CCK so as to stop you from putting them forward?
I think there have been studies. I don't know much about them.
Okay. Spinning circles up. Okay. My presentation doesn't like me.
So the question is, now what? What can we do with CCK, and what can we do to try and help? What does this research help to do with treating or finding the cause for anorexia nervosa? General question. Any ideas?
You have to stop the initial. Do you have to stop the disease before the body adjusts its hormonal levels?
Well, you could, in theory, if you control the CCK levels, especially after the initial weight gain, maybe it would be easier for the patients to recover and at least gain more weight.
That wouldn't affect the mental aspects though, right? It would just affect the being able to gain weight and not feeling full.
Maybe. But a lot of the mental block would come from, if I'm not hungry, why should I eat? So that initial kind of response is if I am hungry, maybe I'll be more, and people will be at least slightly more inclined to eat than if they feel full.
Is there a relationship between CCKA produced and CCKB produced? If there's more, is there a relationship between, so CCKB is the intestinal one?
CCKB is in the central nervous system,
Okay.
not primarily in the central nervous
So I'm
system.
guessing what I'm asking is, if one is produced, is the other produced? Is there a relationship between the two?
This study only looked at the CCKA receptor.
So we don't know exactly what's happening in the brain. We don't know how this person's feeling.
I don't know if science knows. I don't know. There might be studies out there on it. I don't know anything about it.
So you made a strong case for how anorexia nervosa is that has a strong genetic component. But that being the case, do you have any personal ideas why, if it's so ingrained in the human system, it only primarily is seen in early and mid-adolescent girls?
I don't know. I think maybe, although there is a genetic component, part of it also does require, I mean, I don't know, I speculate that maybe like epigenetic control, with the whole idea that perfectionism, the loss of control, or like the media image, so it would be outside factors, but those outside factors would, if a person is genetically predisposed towards anorexia, then those outside components would drive them into the disorder.
And Teddy, I believe you see it in males, especially male wrestlers. If that's the case, and Shelby, you might be able to shed more light on this, but if that's the case, I think a lot of this must be like a sampling problem. I mean, how willing are you as a male to say that you are anorexic, or even be suspected as an anorexic? I can't answer that question, but I'm suggesting it might be a problem. Hey, Maggie.
It'd be interesting to see sort of a percentage comparison, what the breakup in age and gender is of anorexia.
Yeah, I know gender, it's like 99% female.
But you see the same thing in spousal abuse, right? Where it appeared, and there's probably more female, okay, I can't actually speculate on that, but it certainly appears that there's a much higher rate of females being abused by their spouse. When
Some of that could be reported.
Yeah.
Right,
Males don't report.
Right, so while that may be true, the male number is certainly underreported.
But it's increasing,
It is.
yeah, significantly. It's now dropped to about like 90 and 10% instead of 99.
And if I could just make a comment too about the wrestlers, it's not so much anymore as it used to be in the past because there's a lot more, there's not as much weight restriction. There's a lot more poundage allowances from tournament to tournament. But it has been found in a lot of the weight sports like judo, horse racing, dancing, when you do see male participants who will show disordered eating or even eating disorders. So there's a distinction.
Wouldn't that suggest that when you become a professional in something that requires those weight restrictions, wouldn't that mean you believe that those are really just an unhealthy mindset to go into that?
So maybe it's the mindset that requires or that gives you the ability to become a jockey. Not everybody.
Plus, when you think about it, I feel like I've heard a lot in like health class that if you're anorexic or something like that, it's hard to admit to it. And I feel like, you know, adolescent teenage girls have parents and people looking for the signs, but if you're an adult, you don't really have as many people looking to notice things like that.
Can I just make a comment to that as well? When I was the athletic trainer at Hillsborough High School, I had a couple of cases in which the parent actually was very glad her daughter was losing weight because she herself was overweight. So it actually took almost 6 months before I could actually have the mother admit that the daughter needed to be admitted to the hospital. And at that point, she had lost over 25 pounds. So it's not always the case that the parents are open to that. Sometimes they don't see it. And you're right about the adults, because that's something that, especially with anorexia nervosa, is something that they are in recovery for years. It's not something that they just come out of.
Right, because anorexia can be addicting. So you guys know how opioids work? They're kind of, opioids are painkillers. People get addicted to painkillers. So when you guys remember like the last time you were really hungry, and then if you don't eat for a while, after a while, that hunger just kind of goes away. Like you're starving and like your stomach's growling. I always get this on airplanes. And then like it goes away after a while. That's because your body releases endogenous opioids, which are like your body's own painkillers. So the theory is that people who have anorexia are addicted to these opioid release because they're addicted to the painkiller, and opioids also give you a good pleasure feeling. So.
But Shelby, that model, I think just generally as a rule for addictions, that model, that positive pleasure-seeking model doesn't work. And I think we've seen it over and over and again because, for example, with naltrexone treatments of those kinds of diseases, you should see then, if a person is not able to get that high,
Okay.
then they should stop. But you continue to see, even when a person can't get a high, you continue to see people using drugs. Well, there's no effect other than the negative effects. And I think what's being pushed now as the new model of addiction is not necessarily chasing a high, but escaping a low. So I think that there may be some kind of anxiety, perhaps if you're living a life that is uncontrollable, you're not really seeking control as much as escaping lack of control or the anxiety associated with lack of control. Because if that's the case, then you're still trying to escape because you still have the
You can build
impetus.
up a tolerance to endogenous opioids.
Can you? Yeah.
Okay.
There's a guy named George Cood who has a lot of stuff on addiction. It's all kinds. It's really interesting. Actually. So this is another case of perhaps not having the ability to make decisions or being controlled by your hormones, such. Throwing it out there. Thanks. All right. Thank you all for coming. Next week is Will Johnson.
Sorry about that.
That's fine.